Can everyone hear me? Thank you for such a lovely introduction. Can anyone see the slides okay as well? Don't need the lights down at all. Thank you to James for the Silver Society for the invitation to speak today. It's lovely to be here. And as James mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you about the silversmith Junko Mori, who for me personally is just one of our most exciting and innovative artists. I'll be showing lots of images of her work, particularly pieces produced on a large scale, and describing her sources of inspiration as I go along. And before I kick off, I really wanted to say a big thank you to Adrian Sassoon London, who represents the artist, for allowing me to use so many of their beautiful photographs. And if the technology complies, which I very much hope it does, I've got a short film of Junko to show you that I commissioned as part of an exhibition I worked on at Temple Newsom House in Leeds a couple of years ago. So you can see some of her working techniques and hear the artist speak for herself about some of the challenges of working with silver, the joys and her inspiration. Junko lives and works in the very beautiful Kling Peninsula in North Wales, but was born in Yokohama in Japan. She didn't actually start off in metal, but studied a course in 3D design at the Musashino Art University in Tokyo, where she explored many different types of material, including metal, but not silver at this stage, plastic, textiles and ceramics. I think it must have been a really inspiring environment to be in. Following university, Junko then undertook a move that, at least on the surface, might seem a bit unconventional, and that she spent a year in industry, working as a fabricator and a welder in a factory, creating all sorts of consumer products from bikes to gates. And really importantly, this allowed her to absolutely refine her techniques, particularly as a welder, but also gave her an opportunity to save up the finances she needed to come to Britain to study. And she'd met Hiroshi Suzuki while at university in Japan, who was then teaching in Camberwell. And she became a student at Camberwell, studying for a BA, and for a period actually worked as a studio assistant to Hiroshi. While at Camberwell, she was encouraged by her tutors, including Hans Stouffer, to experiment with silver. And with funding from the Sheffield Assay Office, who provided material, she started to explore the material, and it just opened up a wonderful new world of creativity and expression to her. And quite rightly, the Sheffield Assay Office holds in its collection the very first piece of silver made by Junko Mori, a silver organism piece from 2001. Junko also spent time in Liverpool working with the silversmith Chris Knight, and I think he certainly seems to have been influential on her practice. His approach to surface, creating works that are immediately tactile and yet also have a sense of danger about them. You can use them, you can touch them, but they might spike your hand. Her work is well represented in major public collections in the UK, including the V&A, British Museum, Manchester, National Museums of Scotland and Wales, as well as the Museum for Art and Craft in Hamburg. Her practice is centred on the use of two metals, mild steel and fine silver, although gold has started to creep in too. And the manipulation of these quite different materials through a virtuosic skill and innovative interpretation of traditional methods, especially hand forging. It was through Junko's organism series that I first got to know her work. There was an example in the collection in Cardiff that I worked at, and I just loved it right from the get-go. So the organism pieces are typically small, forged objects, usually a riff on one shape or element, combined in multiples through welding to create sculptural forms in steel with wax coating to protect the surface, or in silver. They're abstract in form, but often inspired by the natural world, by sea urchins, pine cones, and flowers. They're typically about 15 centimetres in diameter, so if you're very lucky, you can cradle them between your two hands. In steel, they're often combined with natural elements, dried flowers, even chilies sometimes, emphasising the natural world that's inspired them, but also setting up a really interesting contrast between the rigid strong metal, and the extreme delicacy of, in this example, the fragile Nigella seed pods that sit cradled amongst the spikes. Junko doesn't work to any preconceived design, she's really clear about that, but she does sometimes explore repetition and form on paper. When I was preparing for the Temple Museum exhibition, she sent me these drawings when I said, have you got anything on paper that could help illuminate your process for people coming? And she rather disparagingly called these doodles, which I think is really nice. I certainly wouldn't have applied that term to them myself, but they give a really interesting sense of just how creative you can be with one basic shape. So on the image on the left, she's obviously taking this what could quite easily be a forged, undulating piece and repeating it in a way to form an asymmetric ring. And on the right-hand side, a more recognisable sort of typical organism form with these really sort of dangerous-looking spikes, creating almost a funnel-like shape. So there's an interest in the spiky exterior, but also the more contained interior surface too. As a child, Junko was absolutely fascinated by microscopes and the contrast between the macro and microscopic details within nature, which has continued throughout her life and artistic practice. She has said that she's interested in the tiny detail, and again, I think that these sketches or doodles give you a sense of that. So while doing some research, she's described noticing, for example, the similarities between patterns on Mars and those in human vein structures, which is quite astounding really, which she said sparked an infinite impression of repetition in nature to her. Just to delve a little bit more deeply on her own definition of herself as an artist, this is from her own statement, where she says, my work consists of multiples of individually forged steel or other metals, and the subtle difference of each piece results from hand hammering. No piece is individually planned, but becomes fully formed within the making and thinking process. Repeating little accidents, like the mutation of cells, the final accumulation of units emerges within the process of evolution. The uncontrollable beauty is the core of my concept. So in addition to this really deep affinity with nature and its beautiful accidents, Junko also has a deep love of old things, of history and historic objects. And I wonder if actually this is why her pieces just work so well alongside them. She did say to me, I just don't like contemporary art. No judgment then. The majority of publicly held works by her are in steel, and until recently, with the Temple Museum purchase, the only examples of silver have been from the relatively small organism series. But larger scale work has always been part of her repertoire, but the level really of her ambition, creativity and skill does seem to me to have been on a really exciting trajectory in recent years, particularly in her use of silver, both alone and in combination with steel. One of her earliest explorations with scale was a really bold commission for the Sheffield Assay Office's new headquarters in Hillsborough, which was completed in 2008 when she was in the city for a residency at the Yorkshire Art Space Studios. And as you can see, it really is huge. It's on the side of a building, you cannot miss it. What a great commission to have. It's got a deeper layer of significance in that it's the first large-scale work to be assayed in mixed metals, following the introduction of the Mixed Metals Act the year before in 2007. So it's made from a combination of stainless steel, copper and fine silver. The design was part inspired by Junko's research into Henry Clifton Sorby, who was apparently a pioneer into microscopic research on steel, but I can't claim to know anything about it, unfortunately. But certainly the recurring image of that beautiful rose-crown mark for Sheffield, which you would have seen in repetition when studying all of those beautiful objects in the Sheffield Assay Office's collection, was the prime influence. So the outcome was this amazing segmented piece that can be arranged in different compositions, that really reduces the famous Sheffield rose to a minimal but recognisable number of curving parts. And I think a really brave and bold commission for the Assay Office too. In steel, Junco's work has also been increasing in size and volume for those organism pieces. A wonderful example is this Chatsworth chandelier, Plants Exotica, which was commissioned for the Modern Masters exhibition at Chatsworth House, the first in a series of chandeliers that the artist has been inspired to make. So large scale, but also unusual in that it's both a functional and sculptural object, which I think was a first for her. The chandelier was inspired by the Devonshire family's long history of collecting plants and the important botanical books that are held in the library. And this is a theme that was explored in her botany pieces you might have seen at Silver Speaks at the V&A a couple of years ago. In essence, it's a very simple form. As you'd expect from a chandelier, it has a central hanging point with a circular form around it, but then it just absolutely is overloaded with this incredible abundance of plant life in an asymmetric form that gives it a real sense of organic growth. The artist describes it as a powerful mass of brightness. A defining moment for her appears to have been the opportunity to create these large pieces in silver during a residency at the Portland Gallery in Welbeck Abbey. They were made partly in response to a pair of candelabra in the Portland collection and partly inspired by her own collection of dried plants, hence the title. These candlesticks were cast in sterling silver in parts from small groups of specimens of dried plants, flowers and seed pods that were set into a casting matrix and then assembled. I think each candlestick is made from about 6 different clusters of cast parts. So the specimens were obviously burnt out as part of this casting process, destroying the artist's original collection while preserving its reinvented image. The title for me is also really evocative, Frozen Forest Candlesticks. It's a really early expression of her interest in the life that springs out of the forest, the sense of abundance in nature, and the unpolished state makes it almost seem as if a layer of frost has settled upon them. So I'd like to talk about 2 series for the rest of my time, 2 series of work produced by Junco Mowbray, Spring Fever, Silver Poetry, and Uncontrollable Beauty. If you think back to the very first image on the first slide, that was an object called Silver Poetry Spring Fever Ring, which I will come back to in a few minutes. And that's been described as Junco's masterpiece in silver, and it is a really outstanding sculptural work and the first contemporary piece of art to be collected specifically for Temple Newsam House, marking what I hope will continue to be a new direction for the development of its collection. And the point of departure for that object was the 2008 Schoenhoven Silver Award, which asked applicants to respond to the brief of poetry in silver. Maury's submission, this piece, Silver Poetry Spring Fever, was awarded second prize and was just the beginning of an incredibly rich vein of work that she continues to excavate and find new joy in. The object incorporates 17 different elements, the number of syllables in a haiku, and the second source of inspiration was the phenomenon of spring fever, as she describes it, the explosion of life on the forest floor at the start of spring, which has been observed by the artist in Japan and more recently her home on the Sublime Clean Peninsula. So where the frozen forest candlesticks embody a sense of real stillness, this piece for me captures a spirit of movement and of growth. It takes a broadly bold form, but it's a piece of organic sculpture. The different elements were hand-forged, then added together spontaneously using a tungsten inert gas or TIG welder, piece by piece, to create, in the artist's words, a gift from nature itself. This piece, made 5 years later, uses many of the same motifs or elements from that first experimental piece, though the form is quite different. The dome shape is perhaps a little bit more of a literal depiction of the forest floor. And here, just some details, so you can see these gorgeous little clumps of mushroom-like growths that seem to lean towards the light in all sorts of different directions. and this glorious sort of moss-like textured background through which sprouts and shoots seem to grow. I like it if you couldn't tell. So back to this one, Silver Poetry Spring Fever Ring, the most ambitious piece in the series of work inspired by this concept. And it captures Maury's full creative and technical range. It's created from almost 9 kilograms of the softest fine silver, mostly left in the white, giving it a really beautiful, soft, silky surface quality. The richness and density of the object really is extraordinary. It includes 31 different hand-forged components made from silver rod and wire, and many of which are sort of suggested flowers and leaves. It's just very, very beautiful, but terrifying to move. It's 9 kilograms almost, and really does yield slightly under your hands, so an object to be moved only when absolutely necessary. Thankfully, the artist, helpfully the curators of the future, did leave a couple of flatter areas that can be utilised. So the number of elements, 31, references the Japanese poetic tradition of the tanka, a slightly longer poetic tradition than the haiku. And these components are repeated, clustered, and joined with the TIG welder to form a beautiful, gently undulating ring. Junko uses the welder to really carefully fuse or melt one element to another. So there's not a piece of solder in this whole object, but just the very occasional addition of a small piece of silver wire when a little bit of extra material is needed. It's entirely freestanding, it has no internal support or structure, and there is a point at which the two ends are connected, which Maury described to me as almost impossible and compared it to a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. In addition to its poetic context, there are different layers of symbolism. The ring form as an emblem of the cyclical nature of life, but also a literal reference to a rusted and crusted iron ring that the artist found when exploring her environment. The asymmetry and naturalism could reference the Rococo and works particularly well alongside 18th century silver in this style. And also, of course, again, the idea of spring fever and rising natural abundance and uncontrollable growth. Now, I've got a short film, it's only about 6 minutes, that I'd like to play to you, which just delves into this object in a little bit more detail. So fingers crossed. It's just 6 minutes long, so not too long. And hopefully you can all hear it. It does have subtitles if not.
This object's called Silver Poetry Ring, which is inspired by the phenomenon of spring fever, which is representing the early spring forest floor. These amazing plants start gushing out on top of each other after a long cold winter. I was actually inspired by the making process of shortest Japanese poetry, which is a tanka, which is 31 syllable to represent the beauty in your surrounding. So I decided to create 31 variation of components to assemble into this elaborate organic phenomenon in the early spring in Wales. This piece is made out of all hand-forged components, 31 variation, 9 kilograms pure silver, and then TIG welded entirely from the beginning to the end. When I'm making things, I don't design first, so I just add on the units I created. The final outcome is almost a gift from nature itself. I'm going to demonstrate now. This is a forging hammer, which is very old, more than 100 years old apparently. It got slightly curved head, so it's easier to stretch the silver. So as you can see, I'm just stretching the volume of material toward the tip. So this is the cold forging because once it's hit, you can't bend it. When I wanted to connect this boss end of the piece was very hard because it was almost jigsaw puzzle where to link was almost impossible. But I'm not going to let you know where I started. It's the trade secret. There is somewhere where I started, I remember, and where I ended because it's hidden. So it's secret. So this is TIG welder, this is the torch, and this tungsten bit is basically heating the tip. The first silver components have to be attached to the vise nice and steady, and then the second piece is gently hold it on a plier, then basically fusing it together. Then once everything's grown in a certain size, I remove from vise, then carry on welding process onto the copper surface. Silver is actually naturally white in color, but if you polish it, it became really like a mirror. Lots of people polish the silver beaker of silver bowl, so I wanted to go opposite, but at the same time I wanted to use this shiny property to basically compare the aesthetic. These partly polished area sort of lifts the 3D-ness out of it, so that was my intention. This is one of the techniques I use to make silver poetry ring. So I cut them into short unit. Basically, this silver is placed into the frame, never too far, never too close. It's about a centimeter. Did you see it? So it's just about holding the amount of the silver. Then quench it in the water. It's pretty under. I love this process. It's amazing the museum, like such as Temple Museum, is acquiring these pieces because it will be shown to the much larger number of people, which is such an honor. It's an incredible feeling, especially this piece is almost showcase of what my making process is. You won't even believe that the beginning of this component was almost same material, silver rod or wire, but completely different just by simple techniques such as hammering. I want everyone appreciate the fact such a simple technique can create this elaborate, complicated look of work. It would be fantastic.
Apparently it does have a hallmark on it as well somewhere. So a number of more recent pieces are an interesting development. Should I turn this back down here? Is that still okay? Or have I disappeared entirely? It's okay? A number of more recent pieces have a really interesting development of the Silver Poetry Spring Fever idea. So really rich assemblages of elements within a compact open form that she's more traditionally really explored in other series of work, and quite a different effect to the ring. The artist generously shared with me a few working images from the most recent iteration of this series, made last year. Here it is, and weighing in at a stupendous 11.4 kilograms. So some images from her bench with little hammered and textured petal forms, some lovely sort of entwining, curling tendrils that have been hand forged. And here an idea, giving you an idea of partway through the making process where she's clustering different elements together to start creating 3D sections, and then an image of her welding the insides of using all of those different parts together. So very briefly before I finish, I'd just like to talk about the Uncontrollable Beauty series of work, which is another idea that the artist has continually returned to over the last few years. And while the inspiration behind it is similar to that of the Silver Poetry Spring Fever series, it's really quite different in character. They typically include fewer elements in repetition, often with a very specific focus on a particular plant, flower or natural form, such as a cloud, or a more tangible or literal reference to a natural form like this hydrangea blossom, with an example that I've managed to squeeze in from the National Trust's garden in Massey, just by way of comparison. And a detail of the petal with its impressed leaf pattern on it. Or this one called Cherry Bud, which is a really subtle interpretation of the quite bare branches of the cherry tree before the buds swell and blossom, which is the time at which they're more usually celebrated. And the polished tips at the end of these branches just are really suggestive to me of the energy that's contained within them. This is just glorious, Uncontrollable Beauty 100 Blossoms, which is a wonderful arrangement of unique, fantastical flowers, which is just beyond luxurious. And it really reminds me of the incredibly expressive, technically masterful bouquets made in hard-paste porcelain in the 18th century by Meissen, for example. The cloud forms are the largest pieces in this series, and they were inspired by the sky above her home in Wales. Junko described to me how she wanted for a long time to make an object that was really large in volume, but light enough to be lifted with one hand. So you can see, although this is over 50 centimetres in diameter, it's less than, well, it's about half the weight of the Silver Poetry piece, the Birmingham piece. And when she was thinking about what she could use as her inspiration for making something large but light, she looked up in the sky and saw a cloud, and there the idea was born. The first one was made in 2011, and she's made a few since, and they're made from extremely thin discs of silver, made from melted down silver grain that are perforated by hand and then joined together piece by piece with a TIG welder. So when you're talking about such wafer thin little discs of silver, what a precarious technique to apply to them. They're so thin that the silver could really easily melt away if she wasn't such a perfect technician. And I just wanted to finish on this slide, as it neatly brings together the two different series. It's the largest piece that she's ever made in both size and weight, 12 kilograms. Astonishing. Where will she go next? I'm not sure, but I just can't wait to see. Thank you very much.